Stand! Stand! Stand!
You want to dance? Ask me nicely. Let's talk. Better listen very carefully.
No problem. You having fun?
No!
Thanks.
Hello, and welcome to Jean-Claude Van Damme, episode 20. This is a podcast where we talk about Van Damme movies because he's the saddest clown in the world. I'm your host, Marcus Jones, and joining me today is Joseph Finn. How are you doing, Joseph?
Thank you for having me, Marcus, and I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Today we're talking about 1996's The Quest, Van Damme's first directorial debut movie, and I hadn't seen this in quite a long time, and I have really mixed feelings about it, but I was excited to talk about it.
Me as well. I admit I watched it for the first time last year because the podcast How Did This Get Made did an episode on it, and it sounded so insane that I'm like, I have to see this. Why have I not seen this particular Van Damme movie? And now this is my third time watching it. It's a Van Damme that kind of fascinates me for a couple of reasons.
Third time in a year.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy. Okay, so to start off with, why don't you tell me a little bit about your history of Van Damme? Like, where was this when you first saw it? Like, how many other Van Damme films had you seen, and what made you want to choose this film to talk about?
Well, my history with Van Damme, a little background, I was 15 when Bloodsport came out, which is kind of the perfect age for when Bloodsport came out. And he's like, oh my god, this crazy martial arts movie with this weird Belgian guy, and he's just kicking butt, and it's got fun stuff, and it's got the weird guy who played Ogre in Revenge of the Nerds, and it's just a very fun movie. And then I just kind of...
Donald Gibb, by the way, I just got to throw that out there.
Thank you. I actually rewatched Bloodsport again last night just to prepare myself for this, because I'm like, there's a reason I wanted to rewatch Bloodsport. I never was the biggest Van Damme guy, because a lot of his stuff never had the greatest distribution. I mean, there was your Cyborgs and Universal Soldiers, but then there was the DVD era, where the straight-to-video...
It was a lot.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff. So Van Damme was never, for me, the big guy on my radar, but he was always like, when a Van Damme movie comes around, I usually kind of enjoy it, because he doesn't seem to take himself too seriously in his movies, which I think is a good thing. And, he's made some fun stuff. He's made a lot of schlock, but I always kind of enjoyed his stuff. I was never the biggest Van Damme guy, but I enjoyed Van Damme. Now, as to why I picked The Quest, partially it was because this movie's kind of crazy, but it's such a weird first director's choice, and we'll get into that, and I think you know exactly why it's such a weird directing choice for Van Damme. And I'm like, I want to talk about this one, because I don't want to rip on the movie, because I think it's actually very entertaining, but there's some serious things to talk about with this movie that are a little problematic and or interesting.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, it is a lot of fun to watch. It is very entertaining, but there is a lot wrong with it. Like, it was about maybe 10 minutes into this movie where I was like, oh shit, this is really bad. But as it went on, I kind of got more and more invested in it and enjoyed it more and more. But yeah, no, that's something you mentioned, was that he doesn't take himself too seriously. And honestly, like this, his first directorial debut, like him directing his own movie and basically kind of redoing Bloodsport in a more stylistic way, is kind of Van Damme at his most serious, but is still so ridiculous that it seems like he isn't being serious about it.
I mean, the movie starts out with him as basically running a street gang in New York, and he's playing kind of a sad French clown on stilts with white face makeup. It's like, what the hell?
He basically starts out as like Peter Pan with his own gang of lost boys.
Yes. And that's not even talking about the framing device of old man Jean-Claude in a bar in what looks like 1950s New York, beating up, 1970s New York, more like it, beating up some street punks who are trying to rob the bar.
Not only that, but the fact that it's very obvious that all of his dialogue as an old man is dubbed, it's either dubbed over by an Asian actor because it sounds very like old Asian man kind of thing, or it's just Van Damme doing a very horrible stereotype of old Asian man voice.
I tend to think it's an old man stage voice by Van Damme. It doesn't quite sound like an old Asian man. It's pretty great.
It is. It's ridiculous, and also something I noticed as it went on, because you only see it in the start and the end. Him in his old age makeup. He reminds me a lot of like old man Tim Roth in Youth Without Youth, like just very terrible like old man prosthetic makeup.
Is Youth Without Youth the soccer movie?
No, oh, Youth Without Youth is Francis Ford Coppola. It's one he did in like the early to mid 2000s with
yes.
Tim Roth. It's actually an amazing movie, but yeah, old man Tim Roth in that is very similar to this, just kind of like bad old man makeup.
I'm looking at a picture right now, and yes. Wow. It's not the worst old age makeup I've ever seen, but it's kind of goofy.
Well, when you pack that voice in with it, it seems ridiculous.
I mean, I suppose we should summarize the movie if you want to try and summarize this thing. Because
it's Bloodsport, but in the 20s.
Where he is running a street gang of youths who are pickpockets. He's basically...
Hey, it's New York. You say Utes.
Utes. I didn't want to go into a My Cousin Vinny joke.
Isn't he from New Jersey anyway? I don't know.
Where he's basically Fagin, and their base of operations gets busted. He's being chased by the cops, and he gets chased onto a ship, hits his head, wakes up out to sea, and he's been kidnapped, essentially, by the ship, forced to work as a slave for them because they think he's a stowaway. Then they get raided by buccaneers, led by the best goddamn part of the movie, the late, great Roger
Sir Roger Moore, R.I.P.D.
I mean, damn, Roger is having the time of his life in this movie, God bless him.
He is a fucking delight in this movie. And this is the thing is that, I don't know, I never read his memoir or anything, but it said in the IMDb trivia that he stated The Quest, as his most disappointing movie. And I feel like he must have written that before he was in Boat Trip, because I feel like that would have been the most disappointing movie. Even though he is a delight in that movie and one of the best parts about that movie.
And then the Buccaneers, they sell him to a Muay Thai training center on an island. And he spends a indeterminate amount of time there, then meets them when he's fighting in a underground pit fight for the Muay Thai clan, or let's just call them the Muay Thai clan. And then he ends up in basically yet another Kumite, but on a fantasy, let's just call it Asian city. Where
it's a lost Asian city.
A lost Asian
And by the way,
city.
there is a point in my notes where I did write Kumite 3 times with many exclamation points when the fight scene started.
And then he's fighting, and the big prize is a gold dragon. Roger Moore and his fellow Buccaneers are trying to steal the dragon, and he wins against a ton of racist stereotypes.
Yeah, pretty much. So, pretty much exactly like Bloodsport, just more stylized and in the 20s, and directed by Van Damme. This is very important to talk about because it is Jean-Claude Van Director. Like, this is... He's to the point he's had so many hits, he's made money for studios and stuff. I think this is the last movie in his 5-picture deal that he had with Universal, and he got the chance to direct. And he basically was like, well, fuck, I'm going to make a Bloodsport type movie, just more stylized and set in a different time period. And even Frank Dukes, who was the inspiration for Bloodsport and the character that he played in Bloodsport, basically sued to get a writing credit on this. He lost the case in court, but he won the case with the Writers Guild and got a writing credit because apparently him and Van Damme worked on a script like this in the early 90s that Van Damme eventually made into The Quest.
Yes, and frankly, even if they hadn't worked in a script, this is basically Bloodsport Part 2.
Yeah, so it's basically Frank Dux' life anyway, just set in a different time period, and, probably just as much bullshit as Frank Dux'
Right.
Bloodsport story is.
I should tell you, when we were watching Bloodsport last night, my wife, God bless her, had never seen Bloodsport, was calling out what's going to happen about 30 seconds before. I'm like, well, you've obviously seen movies before. It's like, oh, she's going to fight the Chun-Li guy at the end. I'm like, yes, he is. The Chun-Li guy is going to beat up Ogre. Yes, he is. It's not.
Oh yeah, no, and it's beat for beat the same thing, and even that to where like even though I hadn't seen this in years, definitely I was writing out each fight like this country versus this country. Well, this country is going to win, of course, either because like this racial stereotype, or like of course you want this person to go forward in the tournament, and then of course either Mongolian wins because he's the bad guy, and U.S. wins because it's Van Damme until they get together at the end.
Right. Let's talk about the various contestants in this the Gangen tournament, or as the wiki refers to it, by the way, a Kumite-like tournament. we have the Soviet Union, we have Scotland, we've got Spain, Turkey, a bunch of Asian countries like Siam,
France, Brazil, Siam,
then we
Japan,
have
Mongolia, China.
Then we have Africa, the country of Africa.
Yeah,
Oof.
yeah, that's one. But I guess they're just like, we're not going to go for specific countries. Just like, we'll take one of those fighters from Africa. And of course, like, he's in one scene, he does a brief fight, gets his ass handed to him, barely gets to do any decent fighting, and gets knocked out. Because, I mean, you have to have him there, I guess. But I will say, even not a Van Damme film, but a sequel to a Van Damme film, Kickboxer 4, The Aggressor, which I forgot to go back and look at this, but I think the guy that is the French fighter might be a guy from Kickboxer 4 that was like the main American guy. But either way, I feel like Kickboxer 4 was a little bit more nice, a little bit more sympathetic or giving when showing different fighting styles from around the world than this movie was.
I mean, it's kind of nifty to see different styles, but it's like, wow, the costumes they're wearing, if they hadn't been wearing such particular costumes, I think I might be a little more forgiving of it. But it's like, Scottish guys in a kilt.
Well, not only that, but it's also the music changes with each country. Like, it's usually whichever country is going to win, it's that kind of music that's playing. But not always, because even, like, when the African guy fights, there's very, like, tribal drums going on and stuff like that. But, like, the music kind of changes depending on what countries are fighting, and it's a little off-putting.
Right. And, you know, some of them, I actually like seeing a lot of the styles. I always like seeing capoeira. That's really fun to watch. And it's interesting stuff, but man, anyway. But you know what?
Well, that's the thing, is that one kind of somewhat trope in Van Damme movies that we don't see a whole lot since Bloodsport is the tournament fighting. Like, it's basically Bloodsport and this, and then every once in a while he'll do sort of tournament fighting, or like going up levels fighting different people and stuff like Lionheart. But this is straight up tournament fighting where you have different fighters from around the world coming together, and that's always really interesting to see these different fighting styles paired up against each other. And that's why, even though this movie is very ridiculous most of the time, whenever you see these different fighting styles coming together and fighting against each other, it's infinitely interesting. And it immediately kind of pulls you in and is more entertaining than most of the actual character drama or story that's going on.
Right. I mean, talking about characters, the female lead in this, the Janet Gunn, she's a drip.
Okay, so here's something I don't understand about her. Okay, so for one, as soon as she came on screen, I'm like, oh, there's a white lady. Obviously, Van Damme's going to have her as a love interest, because that's how these movies work. But I guess also because it's PG-13 and because there's so much other stuff going on, they kind of cut most of the love side plot out. There's not a lot of love side plot. They never, like, sleep together or anything. There's no bun shots. It's a PG-13 movie. But, yeah, and they kind of play it like, oh, she's the daughter of the person that owns the New York Globe or whatever. But they also kind of introduce the fact that maybe she's a fake, or maybe, like, they didn't send her out there and she's just kind of doing it on her own to try to prove herself. But they don't play with that or expand on that at all, which is really sad, because that could have been an interesting, or it could have been any kind of story arc or character arc for her. But instead, she's just kind of a non-character.
I actually took note on this. My impression was that because when she was calling back home, aren't you the person we sent to the Far East to get out of our hair? It's like she's not.
Yeah, to leave us alone.
Right, she's not a fake, but nobody is really interested in the boss's daughter.
Well, but if she was the boss's daughter, you think he would care about her just getting sent halfway across the world for some bloody fighting match where she could get hurt. It seems more like maybe she's even faking being the boss's daughter, or like, yeah, just something like that, to where, like, she feels she has to prove herself and she maybe made herself go out there or something. Like it's kind of, again, it's not explored at all, so we have no idea what's going on.
Right.
But it seems like, oh, I'm the boss's daughter, but then she calls back home and no one gives a fuck. And if she was the boss's daughter, it seems like someone would care.
You would think, or maybe he has other better daughters.
Maybe she's a half daughter.
Okay, let's get back to the fighting styles for a second, because I have a very specific complaint about this movie and Van Damme. Partially because, since this movie has come out, there have been several movies that have come over to the U.S. that use Muay Thai fighting. And my God, does this movie...
Oh yeah, Tony Jaa's whole career is based on that, and fuck does that blow this out of the water.
Oh yeah, this doesn't feel like Muay Thai fighting that we've seen in movies since this. This just feels like Jean-Claude doing some stuff with more leg kicks. Or as in, kicking legs.
About the same as he usually does with leg kicks, but I will argue that that's kind of a big plot hole or a weird thing about this movie, is that yes, he gets left on an island, sold into slavery as a fighter on this Muay Thai island, but he never actually trains with them. They say later on, like, oh, we trained you how to fight like us and stuff like that. But really, when we see him on the island, he doesn't get trained at all. He's doing hard labor and watching other people train, but we never get an actual training montage where he actually learns how to fight Muay Thai.
Well, this leads into another...
That's not a thing.
This leads into another issue I have with this movie. How long does this movie take place over? Because it feels like it could easily be a year.
Yeah, well, I mean, Van Damme grows a number of different size beards, so that takes a while, I guess.
And hilarious beards to me. I don't know if it's his real beard. It could very well be, but it just doesn't feel like that's a real beard.
Oh, it's probably not real, but it's short enough to where it's acceptable. Because just a couple episodes ago, I did In Hell, where he had like a long, scraggly, like prison beard, and that was ridiculous looking. At least this is like just a couple of weeks of scruff kind of growing into it, so it's a little believable.
In Hell is the Bulgarian prison, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh yes, I'm looking at that beard now, and oof. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the header image for that episode. So just going through a few more Van Damme tropes. Of course, nationality-wise, he is an American, but he's Christopher Dubois. And he's just a Frenchish, Belgianish, New York guy. It's not really explained. He's the American fighter in this. There's not any drinking. There's a little bit of dancing, I guess. Or, no, not really any dancing. A little bit of drinking, like at the table with everyone else. A few shirtless fights, but not that many, usually in kind of a wife-beater kind of thing. And pretty much everything else just comes down to the tournament fighting. Like, there's slow-mo screaming and spin kicks and split kicks and stuff like that, kicking people through things in the final fight, but not really leading through it. And he doesn't really have a personal vendetta against the bad guy, which is the Mongolian fighter, which is Abdel Kassi, who was also the bad guy in Lionheart, is the brother of Michael Kassi, who is Tong Po and Kickboxer and stuff like that. Like, he's been in several Van Damme movies, and he was Attila in Lionheart. Like, he's a really good bad guy for Van Damme movies, but he's a bad guy. There's no really personal vendetta until it gets to the Bloodsport plot point of, like, oh, he killed the Muay Thai fighter that he kind of knew, and so he wanted to get vengeance.
He's really good in posing, by the way. I mean, looks like, oh shit.
Oh no, he is imposing as all get out. And even this, like, I feel like he's a little bit less buff or big as he was in Lionheart. In Lionheart, I felt like he was a bit more statuesque. Like, he seems a bit more toned in this, so it's not quite as imposing.
I have a question for you, speaking of the Van Damme tropes. We usually have the helpful buddy from the Van Dammes that I've seen. Where does James Remar fit in for you?
As a fucking treat.
Yes.
It's where he fits in for me. Because James Remar, who is a great actor anyway, he comes in, he has an awesome, like, 1920s, like, almost Irish boxer, like, stash going on.
Yes.
His underhand fighting style. But he's also just kind of dumb in a lot of this, and just kind of, like, has high hopes and, like, doesn't get other cultures and stuff like that, which is fun. But there's also a lot of good, like, slow-mo, like, him screaming kind of things, like just saying yeah in a really deep slow-mo voice, and like, he's good comic relief. He's kind of the sidekick as much as, like, Roger Moore and Jack McGee are.
There is a moment where the first time he fights Jean-Claude, the only time really, when he is putting up his dukes in a total What's his name? Jack Connolly, I think, the heavyweight champion in
Yeah.
the late 19th
Oh
century.
no, it's a Dixie Mixie, something like that. Marksy.
No, Maxie Devine is his character's name, yes.
Maxie. Yeah, Maxie Devine.
I was just trying to think of the name of the heavyweight champion, late 19th century, the guy who beat almost everybody. But anyway, not important. But he puts up his hands in that classic, like, late 19th century, early 20th boxer pose. I'm like, oh, yeah.
It's like the kickball of boxer poses. It's that underhand, like, fists, like, curled up kind of pose.
Right. Okay, I actually want to ask you, where do you first think of James Remar from outside of this?
I mean, he's been in a lot. I think of stuff like Drugstore Cowboy, usually. Yeah, mostly shit where he's like a cop or kind of like a shitty bad guy. Yeah, no, never really so much the hero, never really as lighthearted as he is here. He's usually kind of a shitbag in most movies. But I think the first thing that always comes to mind is like the detective character in Drugstore Cowboy.
Oh, that's a great choice. For some reason, my brain goes to when he was dating Kim Cattrall's character on Sex and the City.
Oh, well, I definitely don't know enough about that.
I'll freely admit, yes, I'm on a Van Damme podcast. I watched all of Sex and the City.
Hey, whatever, man. I'm sure it's enjoyable. I've seen a little bit of it, and it was enjoyable enough. I just like never stayed up with it or never watched it all the way through.
Yeah.
I did, however, at one point gain from some person somehow. I got the like kind of vinyl book of like all the seasons put together. It was like kind of soft and velvety and stuff. And I think I sold it to someone for like $50.
Oh, they got a hell of a deal. Those HBO sets are pretty damn pricey, actually.
Well, again, this was like probably 15 years ago, so at the time it seemed like, oh, I'm making good. But yeah, if I still had that now, I'm sure it'd be worth like a couple $100.
Probably retails for a couple hundred. Yeah. When the hell did Sex and the City go off the air? 2004. Oh my god.
Yeah, so this was probably like 2006 or 2007 or something. I had like that nice velvety book of all the seasons put together, but I watched some of them and I wasn't super into it, so I just kind of like, someone wanted it and I was like, $50, sure. But yeah, I probably should have held on to that.
This question is going to seem completely random because I was doing a Google image search on Abdel Kisi. In what movie does Van Damme play a Hasidic Jew?
The Order. And he doesn't play a Hasidic Jew. He dresses up like one for a chase sequence where he does run into Abdel Kisi, which actually is the previous episode that hasn't been released yet.
Oh my God.
Zach Clopton. The Order, no, basically he's trying to get away, so he dresses up like a Hasidic Jew, and they kind of hide him and stuff, but he runs into just like this big guy that's Abdel Kisi.
I am ordering this movie from the library right now.
Yeah, do it. It's not as good as this movie. It's a bit subpar, but it's totally entertaining and worth watching if you enjoy Van Damme at all.
I so much enjoy Van Damme that I am looking forward to, and I cannot wait until Amazon finally gives us a date for Jean-Claude Van Johnson.
Oh, I can't wait. Yeah, as soon as that pilot episode came out, I made a little mini episode by myself. I kind of wish I had someone on for it, but I was so excited I just like talked about it for like 15 minutes.
Oh man, if you want to...
But no, I'm so excited for that to happen.
If you want to have me on for the first episode, I am so in, because that pilot is awesome.
I know, and it seemed like it got somewhat of a lukewarm response, but I was so on board for it. But again, that comes from like knowing his career and knowing where he is now, and the fact that he was so versatile in that and so able to poke fun at himself and still have a dramatic angle to his character in that I was really fucking impressed.
Yeah, and joke-wise, the Tom Sawyer joke is one of the funniest things I saw last year. I mean...
Oh, God. Yeah, no, that whole thing. Because, again, it's totally like... It seems like maybe it takes place about 10 years ago or so, but it seems like during his early to mid-2000s, like, direct-to-DVD kind of things, like, that's the kind of movies he would be making.
In Bulgaria,
mixed
of
in a
course.
little bit, yeah, it's that mixed in a little bit with, like, reboot and just, like, retelling stories, not wanting to come up with anything original. So it seems just like, like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, or, like, Tom Sawyer fucking kick puncher. Like, that just seems like a natural progression of that kind of thing. And it's really, like, good satire and really spot-on witty comedy.
It looks like it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. But going back to the movie for a second, I want to talk about casting-wise. I really love that Jack McGee, of all people, is in this as Roger Moore's sidekick. He's one of those guys who's in everything.
He is. I wish he had a bit more to do here. Like, he's not even so much comic relief. Like, he doesn't even get really those lines or those kind of moments to be the comic relief to Roger Moore, who was already kind of the comic relief. He seems a bit wasted here.
A little bit, yeah.
There was also, I think, the best IMDb trivia about this, which I don't know if it's real at all or if it comes from Roger Moore's memoir or whatever, but apparently every time a take ended, Jack McGee would just fart. And like everyone thought it was hilarious. Like Roger Moore loved it, but Van Damme was just like, "Fuck you!" Like I'm trying to be serious and make a movie here.
And you know what? I know this movie isn't especially great, even though I really enjoy it. I gotta say, as a directorial debut, it's pretty well done. I think
it's not bad. Like it looks pretty good. I will say, like. Man, Van Damme sure did discover some Dutch angles doing this movie. And the only thing that kind of works against it is the fact that it is more mainstream. It is PG-13. So, like, the violence and the fight scenes are kind of watered down. They're more kind of close, quick-cut kind of things. They're not really that bloody or violent or brutal. They're more kind of stylistic. And it's more kind of, like, softer kind of martial arts kind of movies. It's not like a blood sport. It's not like a more hard R, like brutal, violent, even like an Inhale or something. It's much more kind of stylized, like kind of like what a lot of the stuff he did in the late 90s, like the double teams and the knockoffs and stuff like that. Very stylized, but just doesn't have any of that adult content because it's set in like the 1920s and it's a bit more lighthearted and adventure. It's more of an adventure action film than it is a straight up martial arts action film.
Here's a question for you because I haven't seen it in quite a while. Is Cyborg an R?
Oh yeah, that's an R.
Okay, I don't remember how brutal that movie is.
No, it's pretty brutal. There is a lot of, like, Van Damme gets nailed to a fucking cross during that movie.
Oh god, that's right,
like,
he does.
He gets crucified, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty brutal. The last fight scene is pretty brutal. It's also an Albert Puin film, which I don't even know if he's made anything that wasn't an R, minus maybe, like, his first movie, Sword and the Sorcerer. Also, Albert Puin, who directed 2 of the 4 Kickboxer sequels.
Wait a second. He directed Sword and the Sorcerer, the one with the crazy catapult sword?
Yes.
Oh god.
The one from the early 80s.
Yes,
Sword and the Sorcerer. That was his first movie, I believe. His first full-length movie.
Oh, that thing was a staple of Showtime when I was a kid.
Yeah, no, that was Albert Puin, and he ended up doing stuff like Cyborg. He directed Kickboxer 2 and 4. He did awesome stuff like Radioactive Dreams. A lot of stuff that has to do with cyborgs and or kickboxers. He's made a lot of those movies.
Oh, I can tell you, he definitely did not. He did one film after that definitely was not R. Remember, he directed a Captain America movie.
He did. That was definitely like PG, I guess. He did direct that Captain America movie from 1990.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess he's done a couple that aren't so much, but most of them have to do with cyborgs and kickboxing and bloody violence and gore. So most of them are R-rated. He did a movie called Bullet Face.
I mean, I'm looking at the list of titles, and my god, Max Havoc, Curse of the Dragon. That's a great title.
No, literally, he's directed a ton of films, and at least about 80% of them have the words cyborg or kickboxer in the title.
Nemesis 3, Pray Harder. That's Pray, P-R-E-Y, of course. My personal favorite, of course, is Brain Smasher, ... A love story.
That's an Andrew Dice Clay movie.
With Terry Hatcher. What the hell?
Yeah.
Oh, Terry.
No, I do a column. I haven't done it in a while, but I do a column about Albert Puin movies because I really am a big fan of him, even though he's kind of considered like the Ed Wood of modern day, like, shitty action movie directors. I really love his work, and I've written a column about his movies, but that is one I've been really excited to get to.
He directed Alien from L.A.? Oh my god!
Yeah.
Wow,
he's done a lot of stuff.
You know, I'm incredibly Australian, of course. Sorry, old Mystery Science Theater thing. Getting back to the quest. I'm sorry, I am the king of Divergence.
Hey, that's perfectly fine. Anything that's worth talking about is worth talking about.
I'm actually looking at the IMDb trivia, by the way, and forget the farting part. This is my favorite. Jean-Claude Van Damme asked Oliver Stone to direct, but Oliver politely declined.
I wonder how politely that was. It was more than just like a kind of silent, like throwing his hands up and this like, I'm Oliver Stone.
I'm working on what would be around 96, Natural Born
U-Turn.
Killers.
That would be after Natural Born
Oh,
Killers.
you're right, Natural Born
U-Turn
Killers
was like 97,
was- yeah.
so he would have been working on U-Turn.
Yeah, Natural Born was 93.
93, 94, something like that.
Because I remember it got 2 reviews. Ebert reviewed it twice because he reviewed it before the O.J. Simpson trial and reviewed it afterwards. He's just like, oh, this movie is suddenly a lot more prescient than I gave it credit for.
Sorry, let's talk about this in terms of Jean-Claude Van Damme's career. Because this is 96, he's still in Hollywood at this point. He hasn't started declining so much to where he gets to direct-to-DVD purgatory in the late 90s, early 2000s. This is still like him kind of at the top of his game. He had Street Fighter and Time Cop in 94. He did stuff like Sudden Death. The same year was like Maximum Risk, kind of good action movies. Again, this is, I believe, one of his last movies with Universal when he had that deal with them. So he got the chance to direct. But I feel like this is maybe one of the things that started leading him into lesser films that led to DVD purgatory and stuff. Because this movie wasn't a failure, really. It had like a $30 million budget. It grossed like almost $60 million worldwide, so it almost doubled it. But this is where it started being like stateside. His movies kind of started to underperform. His movies always performed very well overseas, which is why he kind of lasted as long as he did in Hollywood. But I think after this is when he started getting into like the double teams and knockoffs and stuff to where like it kind of played okay overseas, but it did shit like domestically.
Yeah, I was going to ask you because it seems like Double Team is the transition where he started becoming a bit of a... I mean, I'm sorry, Jean-Claude, I actually respect your work quite a lot, but a little jokish. Like, he's taking what he can get.
It kind of had to be. It went from action to action comedy because that's kind of what he did on his own, and then that's where he was kind of put. But that's also a good transition because starting even from like Bloodsport and stuff, like he had input on his movies. He worked as a producer on his movies. He co-wrote or came up with a story with at least for a lot of his movies, and this leads up to The Quest, which he actually like wrote and directed. And then after that, I think because like it was kind of diminishing returns at this point, or at least not enough of a hit to really garner him continuing to do that. That's when he started just being more of an action gun for hire, started doing more silly stuff, still working with good people, like bringing in Asian directors he wanted to work with, making cool mixes of like American action movies and Hong Kong action movies, which I will talk about all day because he does a fantastic job with that, but it just didn't quite sit right with American audiences, so he kind of became more of a gun for hire, had less input on a lot of his movies, minus stuff like Legionnaire, which again was like a direct-to-video that was supposed to go to theaters kind of thing. So this is kind of starting the transition of him being gun for hire before going to direct-to-DVD purgatory, before kind of getting a range and stretching himself out and becoming a better actor, and then coming back with something more personal like JCVD, and then kind of having more of a say and a power over his career going forward.
Yeah, and I could talk about JCVD all day, by the way, but we'll leave that aside.
That's Zach Gruten's movie. We're going to do that.
And I'm jealous that he's doing it. I think it's really interesting that sometimes you watch an actor who's obviously working very hard, has a particular niche in Hollywood or, in other studio environments, Bollywood, whatever. And sometimes the industry just says, no, we're done with you for a while. Maybe we'll do some direct-to-DVD. It's not that we don't like you. It's that we're moving on to other things. And I kind of think that's a little bit what happened to Van Damme. Not that part of it, of course, is that his movies weren't performing like they were. And it's not that, Hollywood rejected him. It's just that they kind of moved on and said, okay, here's the very small amount we're going to give you for this movie. And Van Damme, looking to, get paid for a movie, took it. And I don't fault him for that at all. That's not a bad thing. He's a working actor. I don't know. It's just sometimes that's the life of an actor, that you have a good period of 5 or 10 years, and sometimes you just move on and like, okay, this is what I'm getting for the rest of my career. There's ups and downs in a working actor career.
It's partially also just if you just stay doing the same thing, if you're just one kind of thing, and people get tired of that kind of thing, that can happen. Because that happened with most of the action stars from the 80s and 90s going into the late 90s, early 2000s. Like, even Schwarzenegger kind of, like, was having diminishing returns, but was still a big enough name to do theatrical releases, but they just weren't doing well. Stallone kind of, like, had a few theatrical, but had a lot of direct-to-DVD as well. Like, he had stuff like Driven, which underperformed theatrically, but then he also did stuff like Angelo's Ashes, I See You, Spade, that were all direct-to-DVD kind of stuff. So even the bigger names, and of course Seagal has been direct-to-DVD before anyone could remember, other than maybe Dolph Lundgren, who kind of lived and thrived in there. So that, I think that's more just a catalyst and a whole picture of action movies in general kind of changing. So if people are just going to do the same thing, that's kind of where they were relegated to where they were a rental, they were a nostalgic pick. People kind of like not wanting to go out to the theaters, but hey, I'll rent that because I like this kind of movie.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a matter of you're an action star, and frankly, you're aging. And you can't do the big stunts or half stunts with a very good stuntman that you could pull off before.
And that's the thing, is that Van Damme can still do all of that stuff. Like, maybe not to the same degree, but even still, in this later age and stuff, in the movies he's done more recently, he can do really good stunts. And it's kind of funny to see in these earlier movies, even like The Quest, like, you can tell when it's a stunt double very easily. But he can still do fight scenes, he can still do choreography, and does great with choreography. And this is a movie that kind of showcases that a lot, because not only is Van Damme directing and working on the choreography and stuff like that, but this is a kind of smorgasbord for people he has worked with before, be it actors, stunt people, things like that. Like, basically people he's worked with in other kinds of movies that he brought together to play these different fighting styles from these different countries, like show these different things. Like, he knows fighting, he knows stunt people, and was able to bring these together and choreograph really good fights, even if they kind of had to be watered down PG-13, and even if his directing maybe wasn't the best for it, he still knew how to do engaging and exciting fight scenes.
Absolutely, and you know, there's an enthusiasm to this movie that I really enjoy. I mean, there's... Maybe it's not the best.
It's a bit too melodramatic for me at times, but...
I mean, maybe we should talk about the ending, because the ending, wow. In the ending, he goes back to the bar in New York in let's call it the 1960s, and he reveals the story he's been telling. He's been reading out of a book titled The Quest, written by the woman, played by, what's her name again? Something Gunn.
Janet Gunn.
Carrie Newton. And I'm like, first time I watched it, I'm like, fuck you. Because the thing is that,
he's telling this story, he's just kind of speaking it, but yeah, then at the end it's in a book, but also even just like when he's telling the story, it still has like title cards like, this is where it is, and this is the time it is, and this is how we're going.
It's like the end of Twilight Breaking Dawn, which ends with literally a picture of the last page of the last book. And then the book closes. I'm kidding you not.
That the last one?
Yes, I'm kidding you not.
Part 2. That's the only one I haven't ever seen.
Oh, you should see the final movie, because besides the very end, it is wonderfully goddamn bonkers.
No, I saw all except that very last one. Basically, my friend and I, Cole, that I do Chris Celluloid with, we watched all of the Twilight movies with the riff tracks together. That was like a thing we did. But after Breaking Dawn Part 1, we were kind of so drained and broken from it. We just kind of never came back to it and finished it off.
Oh, Breaking Dawn Part 2 will restore your faith in humanity. It is insane.
I have no faith in humanity, so we'll see what happens with that.
Oh, goodness. Where was I going with this? Oh, and then it closes with the last page of a book, which is a trope that for some reason just kind of ticks me off. But the third time...
Unless it's like the never-ending story or something, like to where it makes sense for it to be part of the story.
Well, the never-ending story...
Or the Princess Bride or something.
The never-ending story is the first half of the book. That one really ticks me off. I'm sorry, guys. I have thoughts on things. The never-ending story, the movie, is literally the first half of that book. It's the part of the never-ending story. Anyway.
Well, I mean, it was just a kid reading it in an attic, man. You expect him to get through the whole thing in one fucking day? No, he got like halfway through. Come on. It makes sense.
Fucking Bastion. That's his name. I was coming up with Benji in my
Fucking
head.
Bastion. Barrett Oliver. That motherfuck.
Barrett Oliver?
That's the actor that played Bastion.
Okay, I'm officially impressed.
He was also in like Daryl and stuff like that. Daryl with dots, like the Robot Kid movie.
I'm sorry, have I mentioned I was born in 1973? Do you think I don't know Daryl?
Well, I was born in 1987 and I know Daryl. That was before my time.
Daryl is an underappreciated kids movie from 1985. With his
same kid that played Bastion.
Yes, and you know what? He's very good in that movie. That guy, that movie's got like Mary Beth Hurt. It's got Michael McKean. It's got a bunch of other people. That movie is a lot of fun.
Excuse me, was it made in 1985? Of course, it has Michael McKean.
That movie's a lot of fun, and I actually have an alert on Amazon as to when it comes to DVD, because for some reason it's never been released.
Is it not on DVD?
It is not, last I checked.
Holy shit. I mean, I know it. I have a VHS of it, but I just assumed it would have gotten released on DVD at some point.
I was happy last year when Cloak and Dagger finally got a DVD release.
Oh yeah, I knew that had a DVD. Well, that did it get a solo DVD release? Because I think I've only seen that as like a combo pack with like other movies. Because it deserves a solo release, but I think I've only seen it like mixed. Like I think it was on a combo pack with like War Games or some shit like that.
Well, I apologize. Looks like Daryl's back in print.
Yay! Go Daryl.
That's a movie where a kid flies an SR-71.
Oh man, kids got to do so much cool shit in the 80s. Like, kids' movies were pretty awesome and dark a lot of times.
Customers who viewed Daryl also viewed Flight of the Navigator, Cloak and Dagger, Short Circuits.
Of course. Of course. I actually love Flight of the Navigator, by the way. That was one of my favorite films as a kid.
For some reason, I confused it for a while with The Boy Who Could Fly, which is so different.
Way different. That's some Jay Underwood shit right there.
Yeah.
But no, Flight of the Navigator is Pee Wee Herman voicing like a robot alien spaceship.
Yeah.
And a kid traveling through time. Very good stuff.
Let me ask you this, because of what we've been talking about. Has Jean-Claude ever done a movie with children?
I mean, other than this, not really. Like, he's never even done like a Mercury Rising or something where like he has a kid sidekick that he has to protect, really. It's mostly, like I said, he has a gang of kids in the beginning, but it's not really a through point. In Lionheart, he does have like a niece that he is like fighting for and stuff, but she's again kind of a side character. Never really like a kid's movie. Like, I think the only PG movie he's ever been in, other than like Kung Fu Panda, where it's just a voice, was fucking No Retreat, No Surrender, which is definitely not a kid's movie. It was just PG.
Sorry, I was just laughing because I'm like, oh god, he's crocodile or alligator, I forget, in the Panda movies.
I haven't seen those. I'm looking forward to one day visiting those.
It's completely, he has like one or two lines a movie, but they're kind of gold because you can tell it's him. And they're basically the second team of the movies. It's like, oh, here's
those
our
are basically
allies.
the biggest hits he's ever had. Like, solo, like, Van Damme movies, it's like Time Cop and Street Fighter are his biggest hits. Otherwise, he has, like, the Kung Fu Panda movies and Expendables 2 are, like, his biggest hits.
He has a child
in...
in...
a side character or stuff,
He does have a child in Time Cop.
Kind of. It's more his wife is pregnant, and then at the very end, there's a little child there that he doesn't know and has to pretend he gives a shit about.
Because the kid has never known this person from a completely alternate timeline.
Yeah, exactly. It's all of a sudden he has like an 8-year-old kid or whatever. Or a 10-year-old kid.
That movie's messed up.
Yeah, but overall, like, no, he's not really like a kid-friendly person. Like, he could never do like a... Well, I mean, I wouldn't say he could never do, but he had never done like a Kindergarten Cop kind of thing. Which even Dolph Lundgren got to do in the sequel, Kindergarten Cop 2, which is not as terrible as you would think it is. I actually kind of enjoyed it.
I kind of want to see Dolph Lundgren's Kindergarten Cop. I'm like, it feels like it could be kind of fun. I had such low expectations going in that I was pleasantly surprised that it was actually kind of enjoyable. There were a lot of groan moments, there were a lot of eye roll moments,
But Dolph Lundgren is really good in it, and a lot of his interaction with the kids are pretty good. And Bill Bellamy is there. He's doing whatever. He's trying to be like, hey, remember when Def Jam thought I could be a player? But, it's all right. It's like a 3 out of 10-star movie, but it's worth watching if you're into any of that stuff.
But I feel like Van Damme, he feels like a guy who, just because he hasn't, doesn't mean he couldn't work with children, because he seems like an amiable guy.
Well, not only that, but even in this movie as well, he was very much about working with his kids, working with his son Chris Van Damme, or Chris Van Varenberg, who plays the young Chris Dubois in this movie, as well as the young whatever his character is in most movies from the 90s going forward. Even far back as Universal Soldier, he played the young Luke Devereaux, and he was in Derailed and things like that. And even today, they're still making movies together, like Kill 'Em All and stuff like that, where, he's in his 20s or 30s, and Van Damme's an older guy, and they're just working together in the Universal Soldier sequels and stuff like that. So he's very much about at least getting his kids into movies. I don't know how good he is about other kids' other kids in his movies, because even this, his whole kid gang thing, it's really awkward and weird. It doesn't sit right. He has his number one that's the oldest kid that's just called Red because he's a redhead, and all of it is just, it's kind of off-putting, and it seems like an afterthought, it's a setup, and then at the end of the movie he's like, oh yeah, and I went back and saved Red and all the kids.
The kids that we haven't seen for 90 minutes, it's
basically it's a couple of freeze frames away from being an ending like an Animal House or a Fast Times at Ridgemont High or a Mallrats or something. It could have ended with oh, and Willem saw the sailboat, or he became Senator Blutarski.
The kids who I have been gone from New York for a year and a half.
Most of these kids have died on the street,
or have gone to an orphanage or whatever. By the way, I actually did look up Chris Van Damme last night because watching Bloodsport, I'm like, that can't be his kid playing the young Frank. Because
no, it's definitely not.
No, the first time he played,
it's not until the early 90s.
First time is in Universal Soldier.
Yeah,
and oh god, the goober who plays him in Bloodsport, Jesus. I don't want to get into Bloodsport. That's a different episode.
I can't. I'm never going to think of the actor's name, but he is the kid that plays Wayne's best friend in the Wonder Years, the one that goes to Vietnam and comes back all fucked up. That's kind of tall and lanky and goofy. That's kind of who that kid reminds me of.
I am very bad with Wonder Years. Wonder Years was in a weird period for me where I wasn't quite young enough to care about it and old enough to know why I should care about it.
Oh, that's more one of my first TV watching memories. I can remember watching the Wonder Years as it was coming out back in 91, 92, as I was a small child.
I want to say I was 16 when it came out. Wonder Years is the late 80s, maybe?
It started in the late 80s. It went to 92, I believe.
88 to 93. So I would have been 15.
93, yeah.
So I would have been 15 when it started. So I was young and dumb. Sorry.
I would have been 1 to 6.
God. Pierre Raffini, that's the guy who plays. It's his one credit.
Oh, is it his one credit?
He only has one credit on IMDb. Bloodsport. Young Frank.
Well, yeah, I guess he did have kind of that weird accent as well. That I guess maybe they chose that kid because they had a weird enough accent that would kind of mesh him with Van Damme.
And also because he was willing to wear a San Francisco Giants ball cap and a New York Giants jersey, which makes no goddamn sense.
He just likes American sports. It's supposed to be a touch base for everyone. Oh, this is a kid. He's in a foreign country, but he likes the American sports. He likes the football and the whatever.
Every time I see Bloodsport, I just laugh at that. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Was his father from New York in the 1950s?
Well, also just this scrawny, lanky kid became fucking 5'9" Van Damme growing up.
My wife had not seen Bloodsport or The Quest before, and she's like, "Oh, this is taking me back to the '90s in college when we used to call him Jean-Claude Van Damme." Just because you watch his movies and you're like, "Oh my God, that guy was fit."
No, he is ripped, and again, this is kind of like, this is almost like his Rocky 4, like, with as far as being ripped and just being well-toned and shit, because there's so many moments in this movie where they just do ridiculous kind of scenes and setups just to show off his physique, like him being in chains underneath, like in the pirate ship, like just to show off those fucking biceps,
Yep.
and just everything they can, like so many like close-up thigh shots and stuff during fight scenes just to show like his musculature in this movie. But no, again, yeah, no, it's Jean-Claude Van Damme. But at the same time, in this movie, it's more, you get like Jean-Claude, you know, damn old, and you get Jean-Claude damn director, and things like that.
God bless him. I mean, I have been poking fun at parts of this movie, but I actually think this movie's quite enjoyable.
Oh, it's incredibly enjoyable. And again, as a lesser Bloodsport, as a Bloodsport where Van Damme just kind of remakes it in his own image and tries to make it a bit more dramatic and stylish and tries to be a bit more mainstream with it. Because that's the thing, is like, Bloodsport was a hard R martial arts movie. It had some humor, it had things like that, but it was a straight up action movie. This is more like kind of exotic, adventurous, mainstream. There's kids in it, blah blah blah, like kind of softening it and lightening what Bloodsport was. That's why it didn't work quite as well, but it's still entertaining because it's an entertaining type of story.
Yeah, it's not like Bloodsport where there is a bone coming out of somebody's body at one point, which I had forgotten about before watching last night.
Yeah, well, the most hardcore thing in The Quest is that there is a scene, I believe it's China versus maybe Brazil or Turkey, to where the Chinese fighter does a double hand slap on the ears of the other fighter, and apparently, like, that was a bit too violent to where that was cut out of a certain version. Like, I think that was maybe cut out of the British version of it. To where, like, that was a bit too graphic for them to show in a PG-13 movie, so they cut that out of it in certain cuts.
Man, the whole PG-13, determining what is PG-13 and what isn't is just kind of a fascinating thing.
Well, again, because depending on how big the budget is, like, you know, you can get away with a certain amount of language. Like, you can show nudity in certain PG-13 movies as long as, you know, it's a James Cameron budget or something like that.
Right. I mean, there isn't even a bun shot in this movie. What the hell?
I know. Like I said, I think the only actual shirtless fight he has is when he's first revealed as a Muay Thai fighter.
Yes.
And when Roger Moore comes across him again after selling him off to slavery, and he is fighting a dude in a ring. I think that's the only time he's actually completely shirtless. Otherwise, he's always rocking like a wife beater, and he's got that, you know, cool headband going on.
And then he's I'm sorry, this just flashed me back to the fight against the I think a German fights Soviet at one point.
No, let me see. I did write down all of the different countries. Let's see. Soviet Union fought Spain.
Okay.
Let's see. Did the German get a fight?
Jean-Claude fights Germany at some point, doesn't he?
Yeah, no. Jean-Claude fights Germany. I think that was Germany's first fight, because I literally wrote down the countries going down. So Germany's first fight was against Van Damme, and I was like, of course, well, Van Damme's going to win this. But also I was like, wait, this is the 20s, right? So he's not a Nazi?
This is the part that I found very, like, weird. They show up in a Zeppelin, which wasn't much used post-World War I. And they're...
Well, not only that, yeah, he tries to get away, and it's like, oh, yeah, but all these guys have arrows.
Yes.
The blimp's worst friend.
There's an iron cross on the side of the blimp. Is he a Nazi?
But no, it would be too early. That would be more, like, even after, but still closer to World War I than World War II.
Yeah, it's like he's probably not a Nazi. It's like these guys are really...
I mean, I guess maybe at most, I'm trying to remember the date that was at the beginning of the movie, but at most it's like the late 20s.
Yeah. I don't think the Nazis were quite in power yet, which is 33.
That's more like the mid 30s.
30,
yeah, like early to mid 30s.
33, I believe. Sorry, folks.
Yeah, 33 or 34, I think, is when they kind of started to come into power.
Yeah, sorry, folks. Don't write in and tell me I'm wrong. I apologize. This is just going off my memory.
You think anyone listens to this? No one's going to write in.
I'm like, I don't.
This is for me, you, and the 20 other people that have been on this podcast.
And the German guy is totally the kind of punch.
But he's like tatted up and shit. It's weird. He seems like he is a Nazi German, but it's before that time.
But he's not quite doing, Nazi iconography. It's just like iron crosses.
Yeah.
There's no.
He's like on the way.
Right. There's no swastikas yet.
Yeah.
Here's me.
Like
I actually have a question about
fighter from Spain. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about the losers in this movie. Do the losers have to stay in the Forbidden City?
No, I don't think that was a thing. I think they're just regular fights. I think the only thing was that James Remar would have to stay in the Forbidden City if Van Damme didn't win his first fight, since he was taking over for Remar and he had to prove himself as a fighter.
Okay.
I think if they lose, they just get to go home, unless, of course, they get killed.
Unless, of course, they get killed.
Yeah, well, I mean, that happens to, like, the fighter from Siam that fights the Mongolian that gives Van Damme his vengeance quest. But, no, I like a lot of these fighters. Like, I like the sumo fighter a lot. Like, he gets a lot of good fight scenes and kind of good shows of power, and then he fights a Mongolian and just kind of goes out. And the thing I hate the most about that is that when he gets knocked out by the Mongolian, there's, like, flubber sounds. Like, that you just hear, like, fat squishing around in like kind of a really gross way, to where it's just like, oh, this guy's fat and his blubber's flapping around.
Right, and you know what? Watching Bloodsport last night when Van Damme defeats a similar wrestler, not quite a sumo wrestler, but somebody, a big beefy guy with a huge mustache, and punches him in the chest with the flat hand. You don't get that sound, and it's a much better scene for it.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like, you see the ripple and everything, because obviously, like, he has a lot of mass and skin and stuff, so it's gonna ripple a little bit, which is good to see for, like, showing the power of it, but you don't need to have it go blah 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 blah.
Right.
Like, that's just fucking silly, and it seems insincere, and it seems mean.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of having, like, a fart noise.
Sorry. Fart noise.
I'll get you every time.
I actually want to talk about one secondary actor in this movie who I really like a lot. I actually looked up his name just now. Aki Alon. That's the guy running the Mutai Island, who is one of those...
the kind of trainer, elder, like, businessman of the island? Yeah.
He's one of those guys who's been in a billion things over 60 years.
I wasn't sure if he had ever been in a Van Damme movie before, because it seems like he might have been, but I couldn't place him.
Oh, have fun going through his IMDb credits, because it's insane.
But I know I've seen him in a dozen things at least.
Yeah, and he's a very much big guy with the SAG union, which I always like appreciating those guys. And he's in House of Sand and Fog, which I'm like, I might have to rewatch House of Sand and Fog just to find out where the hell is this guy in that.
Oh, yeah. No, I barely remember that. I rented that from Blockbuster back in the day. Like, that's how long ago that was. Like, I remember nothing about that movie. Except that I might have masturbated to it. Because I think, isn't Jennifer Connelly in that movie and naked? I probably masturbated to it.
That was in that period where she was, quite frankly, naked in a lot of movies.
Yeah, well, that's called having to be an actress in Hollywood, sadly. And also being a teenage boy that is gross and can't handle yourself and just watch and enjoy a movie.
Then again, looking at
that's where you go and rent anything that looks like it might have nudity and, treat it as such even if it doesn't have nudity.
Let's see, looking at the year, I would have been 2003. I would have been 30 when that movie came out. You would have been a teenager.
16.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm 30 right now.
Oh, happy birthday. Belated.
No, it was back in April, but yeah, thank you.
For the folks listening who have not seen House of Sand and Fog, it's a 2003 movie that is fantastic. Ben Kingsley's great in it. Jennifer Connelly, Shareh Aghdashloo, who is a great Iranian actress. It's really great. And I have no idea where the hell this guy is in it.
Connectedly, Ben Kingsley, I also rented the movie Sexy Beast from Blockbuster, thinking it might have some nudity in it, and all I got was a fucking fantastic Ben Kingsley performance and a great fucking movie. That's a teenager, a blockbuster, baby. I rented Sexy Beast. I just wound up with a great movie with a great fucking Ben Kingsley performance, and, you know, nothing to jerk off to, but I was fucking impressed.
You couldn't jerk off to Ray Winstone into Speedo?
I might have tried, but it just didn't work for me.
Oh
But
my
what I think I
God.
was just fascinated with the movie. But I saw a movie with that kind of dark, shadowy cover called Sexy Beast. I was like, oh, there's gotta be nudity in this. But no, I just found like a really great fucking movie with some great performances.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh that hard at it, but oh my
Oh
God.
no, it's okay. I could literally just start a podcast over like movies I tried to jerk off to from Blockbuster.
Let me tell you about back in the day when there was a thing called Cinemax, where you would try and see boobs through the static.
Oh yeah, no, man, when Eyes Wide Shut came out on pay-per-view, whew, that was a thing. I became aware of Stacy Keach because I rented Butterfly when I was a teenager, because, yeah, you could jerk off to that. Forget how weird and creepy the actual, like, sexuality of the movie was. No, there was some nudity in it.
It's a Pia Zadora movie, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, but that was before I saw him in Titus, and then I was like, oh yeah, that's that dude from Butterfly. I like this guy.
Alright, let me tell you a Stacy Keach movie you should watch. Road Games with, God damn it, Jamie Lee Curtis. That is an Australian...
Oh, I know of that movie. I have not seen it, though.
It's a fantastic driving across Australia and avoiding getting killed movie. Late 70s, I think, maybe 1980.
Nice. So kind of around that, like, Mad Max period, but maybe not so much that style, but still like a Australian road race kind of movie.
Well, it's not a race. It's more of a matter of kind of a serial killer movie where you're trying to avoid a guy who is hunting down truck drivers on Australian highways. These like 2,000-mile long highways with like 500 miles between towns.
Ooh, yeah, no, I totally need to watch that.
Yeah, it's pretty damn good. It's 81. I just looked it up. It's a really interesting little thriller.
Also, Stacy Keach, what Cheech and Chong movie is it? Is it Nice Dreams, where he becomes a lizard?
I am very bad on Cheech and Chong movies.
It's one of those later Cheech and Chong movies, perhaps Nice Dreams, where Stacy Keach plays like a detective who eventually becomes a lizard man. That's something worth watching.
He's an Up,
it also has,
he's an
it also
Up in
has Paul
Smoke
Rubens.
and Nice Dreams.
Nice Dreams, that's what I'm thinking of. I guess he wasn't Up in Smoke as well. But no, Nice Dreams, he becomes a lizard man. And Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens, is also in that. And he just says, he's kind of a crazy guy that says weird lines. Like, well, would you like a hamburger, lizard man? And he's talking to Stacy Keach.
Yep, that's the one. Paul Rubens is Howie Hamburger Dude. I'm terrible on the Cheech and Chong movies.
I
miss the whole stoner culture.
I feel like this is the episode that we have talked the least about Van Damme. But I've had a wonderful time talking about all this other stuff as well. So let's kind of not so much wrap it up, but let's kind of get our overall feelings. Is there anything else you want to talk about from the quest? Is there any overall feelings or thoughts you have about it, whether you want to defend it or berate it a little bit?
Overall, I enjoy this movie. However, the whole stereotypical soldiers of the world, fighters of the world, it's a little bit racist. It
is, but I mean, again, in situations like that, especially at this time period in the mid-90s, like, how else are you going to represent this in a way? Like, of course they say, like, this country versus this country, but I guess you kind of have to represent them in the most broadest of sense. So, like, you know, the Spanish fighter is going to be wearing, like, a fucking puffy shirt and doing very, like, kind of, you know, sexual fighting moves and stuff.
He starts out in a flamenco dance pose.
Yeah, yes, he does. But there's also a little bit more depth to it. Like, there's the fighter from Greece, who I actually really like. He doesn't get a lot to do because he fights a Mongolian and gets taken out pretty quickly. But his fighting style of just, like, getting in close, and it's more about wrapping around you and, like, trying to just push you off balance and stuff. Yeah, and his physique in that, I thought was actually really great.
Right, my wife actually really liked that scene because she's like, oh, that's some Greco-Roman stuff right there.
Yeah, that's what he was doing, and I thought that was a good representation of that fighting style, and also just like a good fighter, even though, of course, he doesn't have a long scene and gets taken out by the Mongolian pretty quickly.
Right. But it's still, it's a little bit racist, but not horribly so. Except for Africa.
It's very broad and stereotypical for the most part. Like there's a couple of times and a couple of specific things, especially like Africa, that is more like just kind of racist and shitty. Otherwise, it's more just broad than anything else.
My wife actually was wondering, is the stuff with the whole monkey style and the animal styles, is that racist? I'm like, I don't think so.
No, that's actually just a fighting style,
right?
To where you just interpret the movements of certain animals. That's why I like that the fighter from China, this the one that did that. Like he had in one fight he did a cobra fight, in one fight he did a monkey fight, in one fight he did a tiger fight.
Right.
Like he would just kind of they centered different fighting styles around different movements of animals, and it was one fighter doing that with different animal styles. So I wouldn't view it as that way. It's more just an interpretation of those fighting styles and using different animals as a style of fighting,
right?
Which I actually thought was done really well. I think he's one of the best fighters that's filmed in these sequences. Is the Chinese fighter that does like the cobra fight and the fucking tiger fight and stuff. Like those are actually really well choreographed and well done, and that actor that did it is amazing.
I put down his name. Actually, his name is Peter Wan. He is still a stunt worker. He's been in a bunch of stuff. Last thing I know him from his IMDb, I just pulled up just for the hell of it. In The Name of the King, of all things.
Ooh, that's a Oooo Bowl movie, isn't it?
Yes, the Jason Statham and Burt Reynolds movie.
Isn't Ron Perlman in that too, or is he just in the sequel?
Probably. God bless you, Ron.
I know.
I love you, Ron, but
I think he's in the sequels.
Nope, he is in this one. Sorry, the cast list for In the Name of the King is depressing. Jason Statham, Lily Sobieski, John Rhys-Davies, Ron Perlman, Claire Forlani, Matthew Lillard.
Well, it makes sense.
Ray Liotta.
Other than Jason Statham, who at the time was kind of trying to get more mainstream and trying to become a bigger name, he's the only one that seems out of place where we are now. But like Matthew Lillard, yeah, of course he's going to do that. Ron Perlman, he does a lot of stuff. John Rhys-Davies, he'll do fucking anything.
Yeah.
Like, it kind of makes sense. And I love John Rhys-Davies, but he will do fucking anything.
It's literally a lot of people who I'm like, I want you to be in better things.
Yeah, but I mean, fuck, what was Lily Sobieski gonna do? Be in the sequel to The Glass House?
Right.
Like, no, come on.
We all failed Lily Sobieski.
We did, because she is actually quite wonderful.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm sure she's doing fine. Don't worry about Lily Sobieski.
Her best known for in IMDb is, honestly, depressing. It's Eyes Wide Shut.
Wide Shut, obviously.
Joyride. The Glass House in 88 Minutes.
She was in 88 Minutes?
Yeah.
I forgot that. Oh, no. Okay, that's the one with Al Pacino. I was thinking of 15 Minutes that had Edward Burns and possibly also Al Pacino?
I was thinking maybe you were thinking of the 96 Minutes, the one with Johnny Depp.
That I don't know what you're talking about.
15 Minutes is De Niro and Edward Burns.
De Niro and Edward Burns, and 88 Minutes is Al Pacino. That's what it was.
And then there's the Johnny Depp, which is the real
Nick of Time?
Is it Nick of Time?
That's the one from like 95 where he's trying to stop an assassination attempt to save his daughter?
You are correct. It's Nick of Time.
Okay.
Oh.
Isn't his name Nick in that movie as well? Isn't that his character name? It's
No,
Nick of Time.
no, it isn't, because they're not that clever.
Oh, fuck.
It's Gene.
Damn it. Gene? Johnny Depp's not a Gene. Come on.
Come on! Gene Watson.
His name should have been Nick. What the fuck?
Stars Johnny Depp, Christopher Walken, Courtney Chase.
Yeah.
Who the hell is Courtney Chase?
Anyway, okay, so so let's start though. So the last thing we're gonna do here is to give our final Van Damage rating. That's a scale from 1 to 10. I usually say from Derailed to Bloodsport. Bloodsport kind of being the pinnacle of like the ultimate Van Damme style movie. Derailed being kind of the shittier direct-to-video bullshit Van Damme movies. So we're judging this based on A, how good of a vehicle it is for Van Damme, how good Van Damme is it, how much it works as a Van Damme movie, and also at the same time judging it how it is as an overall movie by itself without the Van Damme factor.
All right, I am going to... sorry, am I allowed 0.5s or anything like that?
Yeah, say whatever the fuck you want.
Okay.
This is a podcast.
There are rules, man. I'm going to give this a 6.5. I think it's a good Van Damme vehicle. I think he does a decent job directing it and directing himself, but it is nowhere near Bloodsport. And it's also not a bad movie. I think it's a decent movie with some bad elements, and I'm going to just call this a good,
it's a
solid,
watchable movie.
It's a very solid Sunday afternoon movie.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. You are a little bit kinder to it than I am, which I'm kind of surprised because I'm usually way higher than anyone else in this podcast when rating movies.
I am a kind man.
This is a half Bloodsport, so I give it a solid 5. I basically, as an overall movie, I would give it a 4. Because, like, it is kind of enjoyable, it is entertaining.
That's a little rough.
The stuff that's bad is really bad. Like, the melodramatic stuff, the kid stuff, the sad Van Damme character stuff is all terrible. The only thing to really watch this movie for is the fight scenes, is the choreography, which is great, but again, it's PG-13 and watered down and half a Bloodsport. The reason I knocked it up from a 4 to a 5 is because as just a Van Damme movie, I have to give it an extra point because he wrote it, he directed it. This is like the ultimate kind of Van Damme movie, but just not playing to his strengths. He doesn't get to be overly charismatic in this. He doesn't get to do really hardcore brutal fights. He doesn't get to really show off his body like he usually does in most movies. Like it's a watered down mainstream PG-13 version of a Bloodsport, and so I kind of have to give it about half of a Bloodsport, so about a 5.
If I may retort.
Yeah, go ahead.
You have to judge a movie on what it is and not what it could be. This is a PG-13 movie, which I believe was made as a PG-13 movie. So to deem it for not being an R-rated movie, I think is giving it a little bit of a disservice. Maybe a 5.5.
I'm not judging it on what it could have been or what it should have been. I'm just, in comparing it to the rest of Van Damme's filmography and comparing it to the other kind of movies he's made, like, yes, it's still entertaining and stuff, but compared to the kind of movies he does make, and compared to the rest of his, filmography, which again, this whole rating system, I've rated all kinds of his movies on all different kinds of levels, like, based on his overall career and it being a Van Damme movie and it being an overall movie, it's middle tier. Like, I kind of want to give it a little bit of a leg up. I'd maybe give it a 5.5 just because he directed it, because it came more maybe from his heart than a lot of his other movies. But then when you go back and look at stuff like Bloodsport or fucking Lionheart, which he also co-wrote, which seems way more heartfelt and way more sincere than this movie, which seems more like him trying to make a PG-13 mainstream movie and trying to capitalize on what worked for him before with Bloodsport, more so than something like Lionheart, where he was stretching himself out, he was being more family friendly in an R-rated movie, but being more sentimental, being more dramatic and stuff like that. Like, that's why Lionheart is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Van Damme movie, where The Quest is more like middle of the road, him trying to fit the kind of stuff he can do well, like a Bloodsport, into a more mainstream, make me a bigger star kind of movie, more so than him really pouring his heart into this film.
Totally fair. So, okay, if we average it out, about a 6, maybe?
Yeah, like I said, if you give it a 6.5 and I could do a 5 to 5.5, yeah, like a 6. It's definitely worth watching. It's definitely entertaining. Like, I'm not trying to shit on this movie too much. It is totally worth watching, especially as a Van Damme directing movie. Like, fuck yeah, watch this. See what Van Damme can do behind the camera.
Yeah.
Even though I think, I think it's Peter McDonald was the second unit director, or his assistant director, who actually went on to direct Legionnaire for him. I kind of, from what I've read, like he kind of saved the movie a little bit because he kind of reined it in where Van Damme didn't really know what he was doing as a director. So it shows a little bit, but he's a decent director as well. So like the directing is okay. It's shoddy at times, but it's still entertaining and worth watching. It doesn't have quite as much substance or resonance as something like a Bloodsport or a Lionheart that he seems to pour himself into a little bit more. This seems like he was trying to make another Time Cop. He's trying to make a big hit, go more mainstream, and reach the widest possible audience without exactly playing to all of his strengths.
I do appreciate it as a final thought. I do appreciate when directors don't try to reinvent the wheel. And maybe Jean-Claude went a little bit in the other direction in this, basically recreating Bloodsport in some parts.
Well, and honestly, other than like throwing in way too many Dutch angles for no fucking reason, like his directing is pretty decent.
It's
there's
solid.
a lot of good sweeping landscape shots. It's a beautiful looking movie. The locations are great, so we got a lot of production value out of that.
Yeah,
like a lot of it looks pretty good. Like especially for a first time director, and especially a martial artist action star directing a movie. Like it's not fucking Fire Down Below or whatever.
Oh God. Sorry, you were what, 4 when Fire Down Below came out?
I was like 7.
God.
Or 8. It came out in like 94 or 95.
Everybody listening to this, pull up YouTube, final speech, Fire Down Below. Prepare yourself for 10 minutes of what the fuck was that?
The only reason I own Fire Down Below is
Why?
because at some point I kind of got interested in Steven Seagal. Other than like Under Siege and stuff, I had never really seen his movies. I started buying a couple of his movies, like his early stuff that was actually good, like Out for Justice and Above the Law and stuff like that. I bought some of those, and there was a 4-pack, and it was kind of all shitty, but it had Under Siege in it, but it also had Fire Down Below and The Glimmer Man, and I want to say Above the Law was the 4th movie in that. So I bought it. I was like, at least it has 2 good movies. But yeah, no, that's how I first saw Fire Down Below.
Wow. Oh, oof. Eesh.
It's worth a 4-pack buy because I have Under Siege and I have Above the Law, which is pretty decent, and I have Glimmerman, which is just what the fuck buffoonery.
Glimmerman may be one of the best. I used to be a 90s action star, and this is what I'm doing now, movies ever.
Yeah, but still made in the 90s. That came out in like 97. So it's like, oh yeah, I remember when I used to be a 90s action star, but in 1997.
Which Wayans brother was in that one?
Keenan Ivory.
Oh, Keenan. Jesus.
The more serious out of the bunch, I guess.
God, I don't know what to say about that movie. It's... Anyway. So when does the Steven Seagal podcast start?
Never. I have thought about that, but again, like this is what happens when I start talking about Seagal. One, I realize like there's maybe 5 or 6 movies of his that I'd actually enjoy talking about, that I actually enjoy, and then there'd be fucking 30 more movies of him holding a fucking gun on the cover, and it's the same movie. Like on my site, I'm all about reviewing new, like, aged action stars, like, subpar movies. Like, I review every new Nicolas Cage movie when it comes out. Anytime stuff like that, I'll review Kindergarten Cop 2. I'll review any new Van Damme movie that comes out. I tried to watch one of the newer Steven Seagal movies maybe a year or so ago to write a review on. I couldn't make it 25 minutes in, and I was like, oh, fuck, this is a terrible idea. I wasted $3.
All right, Joey, wrap this puppy up then.
Yeah, okay. So since we brought everyone down... Well, see, and that's the thing, too, is that The Quest, even though it's not a great film, it's kind of subpar, it's kind of silly and goofy and shit, it's still infinitely better than the majority of Steven Seagal movies. That's what puts Van Damme... That's why I do a podcast about Van Damme, and I don't do one about Steven Seagal, you know?
This movie is kind of fun. I enjoy it.
It's fun, it's watchable, it's silly and laughable at times, it's kind of eye-rolling and cringy at times, but it's enjoyable, it's entertaining, and Van Damme is just a charismatic, magnetic screen presence. To where even if you're like, he directed this movie and he wrote it, like, how big of an ego and head does he have? Like, no, he is a magnetic screen presence.
Yeah.
You want to watch him. You automatically want to root for him, even if the material isn't, up to snuff.
Exactly.
So, Joseph Finn, my new friend, do you have anything to plug? Do you have anything you're working on that you want to point people towards? Any social media profiles, names, and shit?
Well, you can find me in all the social media at Joseph Finn. That's JOSEPHFINN. I'm on pretty much any social media you can think of.
Usually with a Kyle MacLachlan profile picture.
Hell yeah. The evil coop, of course. I occasionally put some reviews up at Joe Sees Movies. Pardon me, that's joeseesmovies.blogspot.com. I haven't put anything up in a while, but you never know. I might put something up about War for the Planet of the Apes or whatever I see this weekend. That's pretty much it.
Hey, that Kickboxer reboot sequel's coming out pretty soon. Go catch that.
Oh, God, seriously?
Did you watch Kickboxer Vengeance?
I have never seen any of the Kickboxer movies. I am a terrible Van Damme fan.
Oh, goddamn boy. I'm sorry. I adore that series so much. Like, the original Kickboxer of Van Damme is one of his best movies, I think. But I also have such a soft spot and a genuine love for Kickboxers 2 through 4. 5 has Mark Dacascos, you can just kind of forget that. But 2 through 4 has Sasha Mitchell taking over as like the youngest Sloan brother, like the younger brother to Van Damme. They're kind of wonderful. 2 of them are directed by Albert Puen. But yeah, no, they did a reboot recently with a new kind of martial artist as the lead. Van Damme plays like the old sensei trainer kind of guy and does great in that. And Dave Bautista plays Tong Po, the villain in that. And it is totally worth watching. It's brutal and awesome and funny, and the action is great. It's a great DTV movie, even though I actually did see it in theaters because it got a small theatrical release. But they did already sign off for a sequel to that where Van Damme is coming back, and I'm super excited for that.
I'm sorry, Dave Bautista plays a villain?
Yeah, no, okay, so you didn't see the original, but actually the brother of Abdel Kassi, the bad guy in The Quest, is Mikhail Kassi, and he played Tong Po, the villain, throughout 3 of the 5 Kickboxer movies, named Tong Po. And Dave Bautista played him in the reboot, and he is just this lumbering, huge, tattooed monster that just, like, beats the shit out of people. And our hero is just this muscular but tiny compared to Dave Bautista guy that has to go up against him. It is totally worth watching. It has excellent fight scenes. I highly recommend it because I love Dave Bautista, and of course he's done great in Guardians and stuff, but he does so great. And also just making a villainous role like Tong Po that was just a terrible monster in the original that like raped the love interest, and that was a vengeance fight, which is all kinds of problematic. Here he actually plays a more sympathetic, respectful, and honorable kind of villain in a weird way, and it makes it infinitely more interesting and relatable.
All right, I will check that out then.
I'm like all red-faced and out of breath talking about that. Anyway, thank you again, Joseph, for being on. It was a lot of fun. We've only had a little bit of interaction. This is kind of the first time we've had a full-on conversation, especially, more or less in person. But it's very awesome, and I would love to have you back on if you want to come talk Jean-Claude Van Johnson when that comes back, or if you find another Van Damme movie you want to talk about. You were more than welcome back on this podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Marcus. This has been a very much pleasure to be on. This is maybe not my favorite Jean-Claude Van Damme movie because everybody else had taken the good ones.
Well, hey man, you're still in the 90s period. I'm about to start having to get people to do the 2000 to 2006 period, and that's a little bit harder to book for the show.
Oh, I listened to the From Hell episode. Oh, oh man.
Oh man, I actually really like that movie. But anyway, so thank you very much, Joseph, for being on. You can find the show. We're crushcellular.com. Find us on Twitter, pod_dam. Facebook.com/crosscelluloid. Rate, review, talk about things. We're on the internet. You're smart. You know how to find us. And we'll see you here next time on Jean-Claude Van Damme.